This is a very happy crowd tonight, all eager to hear Diane Ravitch. It's not always the case when teachers get together that we have the happy face on, but tonight we do. My name is Ann O'Halloran. I'm very excited to start the process of introducing Diane this evening. Like a good number of you in the audience, can you hear me okay, by the way? Okay. Like a good number of you in the audience, I taught for many years in Massachusetts public schools. Now I'm proud to serve as president of Citizens for Public Schools, a 31-year-old organization that works to promote, preserve, and protect public education in Massachusetts. They've been in business 31 years, and I had no idea they existed. It would have gotten me more night's sleep if I had realized there was some group that was actually working on issues for public education all these years. So I'm very happy to be in the midst of this group at this point. CPS has done this for me. They've educated me, opened doors for me, and connected me with thousands of others who also feel very passionately about public schools as a pillar of our democracy. As CPS members, we work together to support public schools and resist some of the word I've got here is dreadful, but use your own word, policies, now getting in the way of many dedicated and talented teachers and students. I hope you will consider, after this evening is over, I hope you'll consider joining with us in this battle for public education. After Diane Ravitch speaks, we will give you some information about things you can do right away to work for positive change, beyond what I know every teacher and parent and community member here is already doing all they can to try to bring about change. Thank you all so much for coming this evening. For those of us who care so deeply about public education, it's such a great privilege to be in the presence of Diane Ravitch. It gives each of us some hope that working together we can strengthen our schools for students, teachers, and families. There's a couple of people I would like to introduce who are here. Rep. Steve DiNatale, can you wave? He's over this, right there. And Rep. David Rogers, also, there he goes. Thank you for coming, gentlemen. We know that a lot of stuff goes on in the legislature that could be more conducive to change. Finally, we hope that Governor Patrick and others on Beacon Hill will take a page from Diane's book, or several pages, and look at the evidence, which shows that they should abandon their faith in the reforms that have failed. I'm very pleased to introduce Thomas Gosnell, president of AFT Massachusetts, who will introduce Professor Ravitch. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. I am Tom Gosnell, president of the American Federation of Teachers in Massachusetts. And I welcome, thank you. And I welcome all of you here. But first of all, I want to say, given the night, go Red Sox. Well, it really is a wonderful experience to have here Diane Ravitch, an historian of education and a champion of public education. Now, I would be up here for 15 to 20 minutes if I were to cite everything that she has achieved, but I'll hit upon some of them. She was Assistant Secretary of Education and Counselor to Secretary of Education Lamar Alexander from 1991 to 1993. She's lectured around the world from Poland and the former Czechoslovakia to Japan and Nicaragua. She is a seasoned speaker whose keynotes on democracy and civic education have been translated into many languages, including Polish, Spanish, Lithuanian, Latvian, Russian, Belarusian, and Ukrainian. She was selected as a Phi Beta Kappa visiting scholar in 1984-85, the first person chosen from the field of education studies. In 1988, she was designated as an honorary citizen of the state of California by the state legislature in recognition of her contributions to the state's history curriculum and its human rights curriculum. In 1992, she was honored as a literary lion by the New York Public Library. In 2005, she received the John Dewey Award from the United Federation of Teachers of New York City. In 2010, the National Education Association selected her as its Friend of Education for the year. A native of Houston, she is a graduate of the Houston Public Schools. She received a BA from Wellesley College and a PhD in history from Columbia University. So here in Boston and Cambridge, I would submit the capital of public education. It is absolutely wonderful to have Diane Ravitch, champion of public education, speaking to us. Diane Ravitch. Yeah, let me help you.
Hold on while I put this stool down, and just so I can see you. Thank you. That's better. I can see you all now. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here. I love it coming back to Cambridge and to Massachusetts. Last night I was in Vermont, and for a moment I thought I was in Finland. They have such a wonderful education system. Can you imagine they didn't even apply for Race to the Top? And they wanted so much to be in control of their own destiny that they didn't apply for a waiver because they understood that a waiver from No Child Left Behind meant more federal strings, not fewer. Well, I want to talk to you this evening about a book that I've just published because it raises so many of the issues that we all care about. And I began the book with an epigram, which I hope you all know. It's a famous line from John Dewey's, which he wrote in 1907, and it's really the theme of the book, and that is that what the best and wisest parent wants for his own child, that must the community want for all of its children. Any other ideal for our schools is narrow and unlovely, and acted upon, it destroys our democracy. That means that what Bill Gates wants for his children is what we should want for all children. That's one way of putting it. I could think of a local reference, but he'll do since he owns most of the United States. Another epigram that didn't make it into the book, but which I'm very fond of because it's an Old English quatrain, goes like this, and it also goes to the theme of the book. The law doth punish man or woman that steals the goose from off the common, but lets the greater felon loose that steals the common from the goose. So we are now supposedly engaged in an era that the media insists on calling school reform, but somehow the word reform has become tainted. It has turned into a process that in most states means budget cuts, eliminating the jobs of teachers and social workers and psychologists and librarians, and turning public dollars over to private managers and entrepreneurs, and pretending that test scores are both the best measurement of education as well as the very outcome of education. Many teachers and principals have come to believe that they're public enemies, which is ridiculous. Some reform. Sometimes it seems that eliminating public education is the goal of this era. When I visit cities like Milwaukee, where they're now talking about getting rid of public education, or Detroit, where they're getting rid of public education, or Philadelphia, where the School Reform Commission is talking about privatizing more and more schools, or Indianapolis, where they're talking about reforming by getting rid of public education and calling it something else, or the whole state of Michigan, where if Governor Snyder could get rid of public education, he would, where in Michigan, districts that went into deficit, districts like Buena Vista and Inkster and Muskegon Heights, the solution that the governor had when they had a deficit was to turn the entire district lock, stock, and barrel, every child and every dollar, over to for-profit charter corporations. And the profit of these charter corporations would equal the deficit. He could have just as easily paid off the deficit and maintained these as public schools. Now, what do these particular districts have in common? They enroll black children. It's easy to give them away. Their parents are powerless. He hasn't tried it in the suburbs yet. What he's done in the suburbs, though, which is not all that great, is he's tried to abolish all the district lines and told the districts that children should choose wherever they want to go, so that every district spends at least $100,000 in advertising trying to poach children from the next district. And the kids go back and forth. It's about breaking down communities, breaking down neighborhoods, and turning public education into a commodity. So what we have today is what I consider a series of hoaxes. The subtitle of my book is The Hoax of the Privatization Movement. The fact is, there's not just one hoax, there are many hoaxes. One of the hoaxes, the first of the hoaxes of this era, is called No Child Left Behind. First hoax is, can anyone in this room say that no child was left behind? Of course not. But that's not the real hoax. The real hoax is that at the time that law was passed, and it contained this demand, this mandate, that all schools would achieve 100% proficiency. Every child would be 100% proficient by the year 2014 in reading and math. And at the time, they didn't believe it. It's an impossible goal. No country in the world has 100% proficiency. And I know that they didn't believe it because I went to a panel discussion at the Willard Hotel in Washington, D.C., and my former boss was on the panel, and I stood up in the audience and I said, Senator Alexander, do you really believe that by the year 2014 there will be 100% proficiency in grades 3 through 8 in reading and math? And he said, well, no, he says, Diane, I don't really believe that, but you know, it's good to have goals. Well, based on these goals, public schools have been closed. People have been fired. Teachers and principals have been fired. Communities have been destroyed because it's good to have goals. And they never meant it. They didn't believe in it. It was a hoax. The hoax of our day is called Race to the Top. Race to the Top is a hoax. It's not working anywhere. There's no part of Race to the Top that has any evidence, research, or experience behind it. It's a series of hunches, of hopes, of theories. Since when was legislation based on hunches and hopes? It's causing more teaching to the test. It's demoralizing teachers and demoralizing principals. It's leading to more schools being closed, largely in minority communities. And can anyone explain why we are racing to the top? Can anyone explain what does it mean to race? And where's the top? And when there is a race, who gets to the top? The strongest get to the top and the weakest fall behind. But that's not our principle. Our principle is equality of educational opportunity, not a race to a mythical top. What this suggests, the very name of the program suggests a market-based system where there are a few winners and a lot of losers. So what's behind all of this is the narrative that I set out to demolish in my book. And when I started to write the book, which was last summer, I wrote it last summer, there was a report had recently come out from the Council on Foreign Relations. And this report, which was written by a task force chaired by Condoleezza Rice and Joel Klein, the report said that our public schools are so terrible that they represent a very grave national security threat. Our nation is in danger because of our public schools. What did they recommend? Charters and vouchers and Common Core and more technology. That will save our nation from those nations that have higher test scores than we do. Sort of an odd prescription, don't you think? But here's the narrative, and this report encouraged me to dig deeper because I thought the narrative itself sounded so absurd. So I started looking at their data, and I began digging and found out that everything they said actually wasn't true, and that it's part of what has been now a 30-year narrative. Our schools are failing, our schools are obsolete, our public schools are broken. Do anything else. Hand them over to private entrepreneurs, private managers, put them online, do something. And part of this narrative are claims like this: the test scores are flat, the test scores are declining, graduation rates are a scandal, we have a dropout crisis, we're losing the international race, we're losing the competition. So I researched each of these things, and in the first part of my book, I have a chapter devoted to each of them to say, it's not true. Here's what I discovered. I have to go back a minute and say I was a little bit concerned when Tom was going through my resume because a lot of organizations that I used to belong to, I got kicked off of. Some I resigned from, others I got kicked off. I always have to worry which version of my resume they're going to use. He got the right things, though. It was good. It was all right. But one of the things that I did in the course of my lifetime was that President Clinton appointed me to the National Assessment Governing Board. That's the testing agency that administers federal testing, and it's called the Nape scores. We have Nape scores in reading and math. We also have Nape scores that go back to the early 1970s. So we have trend lines, longitudinal trend lines about how students are doing in math and in reading. So the first thing I discovered is the test scores are not flat. The test scores are the highest they've ever been in history. For white students, black students, Hispanic students, and Asian students, the highest they've ever been in history. And that's true from 1971 to the present. Then I found out the graduation rates are not a scandal. The graduation rates, high school graduation rates, are the highest they've ever been in our history. And because I'm a historian, I go back to, in some cases, like with the graduation rates, and say, well, what were they in 1900 and 1904 during World War II, up to the 70s, and they start to flatten out a bit, but they started climbing up, up, up. Right now, if you look at the most conservative definition of the graduation rate, that is a 4-year rate counting only the students who graduated in May or June, 4 years after they started. It's now 78.2. It would be good if it were higher, but 78.2 is the highest it's ever been. But that's the most conservative way to calculate the graduation rate. If, on the other hand, you look at the census data and you say what % of the young people from the ages of 18 to 24 have a high school diploma, it's 90%. Not so bad. It would be great if it were 100%, but 90% is nothing to be ashamed of. It's the highest in history. Now, the reason there's a difference is because those who look only at the 4-year rate are not counting the students who graduated in August. They're not counting the students who took a year off and graduated in 5 years or in 6 years, or those who got a GED. They have diplomas. They're high school graduates. They should be counted. 90% of our kids have high school diplomas. But whichever way you count it, it's the highest ever in history. And then comes the dropout crisis, and this was a shocker. The dropout rates for every group are the lowest they've ever been in history, for white students, black students, Hispanic students, and Asian students. And then comes, oh, by the way, I should add that the people who call themselves reformers, or whatever they are, they say all these gains are because of No Child Left Behind. This is actually not true. The biggest closing of the achievement gap occurred in the late 1970s and early 1980s. And the reasons for it were, first of all, because of desegregation and genuine desegregation efforts in that period. Secondly, the expansion of early childhood education. Thirdly, reduced class sizes. And fourthly, greater economic opportunities for African American families. These are all paths that worked, and for the most part, we have turned away from almost all of them. The other thing is, you should know, is that with the increase in test scores, and they've been steady and significant for reading. They have been dramatic in mathematics. And the biggest test score gains occurred between 2000 and 2003, before No Child Left Behind began to be implemented. So anyone who says that all these gains are the result of No Child Left Behind should look at the data. It's all in the back of my book. Then comes the claim you often hear, we're losing the international competition. Look at the international test scores. And you'll hear one of the various major figures say, we're number 14, we're number 16, we should be number 1. Remember when we were number 1? Let me tell you what the truth is. First international test was a test of mathematics. It was given to 12 nations in 1964. It was given in 2 grades, 8th grade and 12th grade. In 1 grade, we came in next to last. In the other grade, we came in completely last. We were not number 1, we were last. In the ensuing 50 years, we have surpassed the other 11 nations by every possible metric. We've had greater economic productivity, bigger expansion of our economy, greater military power, more technological innovation, more this, more that, and the other, more democratic institutions, more creative, whatever metric you want to come up with, the test scores meant nothing. We were last, and now we're the greatest nation, most powerful nation in the world. So just yesterday, there were stories in the paper saying, oh, well, there are these test scores, these international test scores were compared to the Nape scores, and more bad news. People love to tell bad news. Unfortunately, none of it's true. And that's the purpose of my book, is to tell you it's not true. So the latest story, which I read at 2 o'clock this morning, is that there's now been a comparison done between the Nape scores for states and the latest international test, which is called TIMSS. It's the Trends in International Math and Science. And they said, well, it's pretty good. Most of our states were above the international average, but we're still being beaten by Singapore and Korea and China and Japan and the Asian tigers, in other words. Now, these are test-taking cultures. They put enormous stress on their children to prepare for the test, to take the test, to study as many hours a day as it requires to get higher and higher test scores. We're America, and the reason that we have succeeded is not because of test scores on international tests, but because of things like creativity, ingenuity, innovation, nonconformity, thinking not in the bubble but out of the box. And think about it. You go back to 1983, we had that report saying we were a nation at risk. And what was the evidence? Well, one of the big pieces of evidence was we had low international test scores in 1983. We were being beaten by Japan. Well, at that time, why were we being beaten by Japan? Because we had short-sighted automobile manufacturers who didn't understand that people wanted fuel-efficient cars, and they blamed it on the schools. But for the past 20 years or so, Japan's economy has been stagnant, and they have very high test scores. Well, what do you make of that? The bottom line is the test scores, once you reach a certain level, above which we are, the test scores predict nothing about the future, and you should not believe any stories that say we're falling behind, we've fallen behind. It's all nonsense. We don't want to be those countries. They should be who they are, and we should be who we are, and forget about the test scores. So based on this narrative of we're failing, which is a fake narrative, and that we have all these crises, none of which in fact exist, and I should mention we do have one genuine crisis. The genuine crisis we have is that we're #1 among all the advanced nations of the world in child poverty, and it's getting worse. And that's a real crisis. But the reform narrative, or the deformed narrative, has been shaped to say, let's not look at poverty. Well, that is the problem, and so we're choosing not to look at the problem. So instead, we have solutions that don't even address the problem. So we get a solution, for example, like the private sector does everything better. Well, maybe they make better mousetraps, maybe they make better cars, but they don't run public services better. What they do when they run public services is what the private sector does. They do risk management. They get rid of the low performers and keep the high performers. They act like everything's a stock portfolio. They throw out the bad stocks and keep the good stocks. If they're running a portfolio district, they close the schools with low scores and keep open the schools with high scores, and then open new schools, which 5 years later will be closed as low-scoring schools. And there's constant churn. I've lived through it in New York City now. We now have high-performing small schools that have kept out the low-performing students. That works. And we've seen this with the charter sector, where in Boston, I remember one of the Boston studies said, the charter schools are better than public schools. And I looked at the numbers. High attrition rates. If you kick out the low-scoring kids, you will get higher scores. There were schools that had no English language learners, while the Boston public schools had 20% or more of English language learners. Can you imagine a charter school with no English language learners? They got higher scores. And there are charter schools that will not accept students with severe disabilities or with disabilities that interfere with their test scores. That helps too. That's called risk management, and that's what the private sector does. We also hear that we will get amazing progress if we just turn our resources to technology. Now, I believe technology can be quite wonderful, and I think the day will come when we'll have laptops where teachers can do amazing things in teaching history and science and mathematics and everything that kids might want to learn in school, but that day hasn't come yet. What we see instead is people rushing to sell their products to school when they're not ready and when the schools don't even know what they're buying. Los Angeles just took the funds from a 25-year construction bond and agreed to buy 600,000 laptops loaded with Pearson content. The laptops from the Apple iPads will be obsolete within 3 years. The content, the Pearson content license expires in 3 years. There will still be a 25-year bond to pay off, and the schools are crumbling, and the classes are overcrowded. And the people in Los Angeles figuring that they had to do this fast because if you're a reformer, you can't wait. You can't wait to think anything through. And so they had a security code put on these iPads to make sure the kids couldn't play with them, couldn't play media games, and couldn't go to Facebook and do social media. How long do you think it took the kids to break the security code? The kids are smart. We fool ourselves by thinking that the younger generation is not as smart as we are. In many respects, they're a lot smarter than we are. And they figured it out very quickly. What the district also didn't think through was, if you let the kids take the iPads home, what happens when they lose them? What happens when they break them? What happens when they're mugged for them? What happens when they drop them in the toilet? These are problems the district didn't think about. So there's another product called Amplify, made by a company where Joel Klein is in charge, which is owned by Rupert Murdoch. And they sold the Amplify tablets to Guilford County, North Carolina. The New York Times Magazine did a big feature about Guilford County. All the kids now have their own tablet. It's wonderful. The week after the article came out, Guilford County withdrew every single Amplify tablet because the glass was cracking on the screens, and one of the chargers melted down, and they were afraid that the house was going to catch on fire. So it will happen one day that we'll be able to move to the technology, but right now there's such a rush to make money that nobody has thought through the problems or figured out what's the content that's going to go on it. Will it just be textbooks reproduced on a tablet, which is a ridiculous waste? But there is a more pernicious way in which technology has invaded our schools, and that is the virtual academies. The virtual charter schools are the single biggest scam in education today. Now, the reason that they spread is because they're very profitable. Think of it, you open a virtual charter school. The way you open it is you find the friendly legislator, make a $5,000 contribution to their next campaign. They introduce a piece of legislation, and voila, Massachusetts has a virtual charter academy. And that means that they can use TV and every other means to lure students, to recruit students, to tell them that they can be educated at home on a computer. So the family gets a computer, and the operator of the virtual charter school gets full tuition taken away from the district to which the child would have gone to school. But they have a few problems. The first is they have a very high dropout rate. About 50% of the kids leave every year because it's an incredibly boring thing to sit home and not have any interaction with your peers or your teachers. And they have very low test scores and very low graduation rates. And the reason that they proliferate is because they're incredibly profitable. The biggest of them is a company called K-12. I think that's the one that graces Massachusetts. This is a company that was started by the Milken brothers. You maybe remember Michael Milken, the junk bond king. He went to jail for a few years for financial manipulation, and he's now an educator. And this is a company that's listed on the New York Stock Exchange, and its stock fluctuates with how many students they have and how factual their latest report about their grades was. But it's a very profitable company. The CEO of the company is paid $5 million a year. His background, his educational background, is McKinsey and Goldman Sachs. So you get some idea about this. Pennsylvania has 16 different online charter companies. They all make a lot of money. They all, I was about to say steal, maybe that's too strong a word. They all steal money from every school district in the state. And the kids come and go, and the online charter company keeps the money. The first online charter company was started in Midland, Pennsylvania, and the school superintendent there was concerned because the district was losing population as the coal industry was dying. So he started a cyber charter school figuring he would enroll the 50 high school students, and much to his surprise, found that he had 1,000 students from across the state, and the school kept growing to the point where it now has 10,000 students, each of whom brings with them tuition of $11,000. Do the math. Midland, Pennsylvania, $110 million is rolling in. And they have hardly any expenses. They have no brick and mortar buildings. They don't have custodians. They don't have librarians. They don't have social workers, psychologists. None of that. $110 million. So things were really cool, except he had to figure out what to do with all that money. And they began creating shell corporations. And just this past spring, the FBI raided his offices, and he was just recently convicted of skimming $8.5 million from the company. And I wonder why he took so little. There was so much. So we have a series of solutions, none of which have anything to do with the real problems. But the biggest problem that the corporate-style reformers have identified is the reason for low test scores is bad teachers. Our schools are overrun with bad teachers. So we must start a process to find these bad teachers and to fire them. And there's an economist at Stanford University. He was a colleague of mine back when I was on the other side. Eric Hanushek says that he doesn't use the word fire, he uses the word deselect. He says that if we deselect the bottom teachers, say 5 to 10% of those whose kids see the smallest test score gain, then the overall quality of teachers will get better and better every year. You just keep firing teachers, and sooner or later, you're just left with a staff of really great teachers. That's one of the stupidest ideas I've ever heard. Because, as it happens, the methods that have been developed are not developed. They're either called value-added assessment or growth models or whatever term is used. None of them work. None of them actually identify bad teachers. They're almost completely random. The people who research them have said it's like throwing darts at a dartboard or flipping a coin. The same teacher might one year be rated effective, the next year might be rated ineffective. So the first year she gets a bonus, and the next year she's in line to get fired. Same teacher. And one of the scholars who's about to bring out a book on value-added modeling, she wanted to call it Bamboozled, but her publisher said that was an irreverent title. So it'll be called something like Rethinking Teacher Evaluation. But she interviewed teachers in Houston where they've been using this value-added approach, and she said, well, how can you explain it? Last year you were one of the best teachers, this year you're one of the worst teachers. What did you do differently? And teacher after teacher who had seen this dramatic change, one way or the other, had the same answer. I have no idea. I did the same thing. I was teaching the same way, and the difference was that the kids are not randomly assigned. And one year, the teacher had a great class, and the next year she had some disruptive kids, and suddenly she wasn't such a good teacher anymore. And what value-added modeling does is it measures who is in your classroom. It doesn't measure your quality as a teacher. So if you're teaching children who have very severe disabilities, you're not likely to see the test scores go up dramatically. If you're teaching children who don't speak English, they may go up modestly, but not dramatically. If you're teaching children who are gifted, your scores will already be at the top, and they won't go up at all. My own grandson is in a school in Brooklyn where his principal told me that one of her best teachers was teaching the gifted class, and they came in, the top score in New York is a 4.0. The kids came in fourth grade, and they entered with a 3.92. And the computer said they should leave with a 3.97, but they only left with a 3.95. So by 2/100ths of a point, she was considered a very ineffective teacher. This is, accepting this as real is accepting total insanity. This is ridiculous. So what you also hear from the so-called reformers is that the teacher is the main determinant of whether students get higher test scores or not, and that's totally untrue. And even some of the reformers have begun to backtrack because they used to say it was the teacher was the only one who was responsible until they finally began to hear again and again that the teacher affects about 10 to 15%, and most of the effect of whether children get higher or lower scores, aside from the conditions of their life, have to do with family, and particularly family income. And so that most of these test score gains or losses are beyond the control of teachers. Teachers can make a huge difference in the lives of children, but on average, the economists say, the teacher has not as great an effect as family life. I happen to have a lot of problems believing economists when they talk about schools, but this is what they say. They measure all these things, they never go into a classroom.